I think there's three major elements: spiritual preparedness, physical preparedness, and then mental preparedness. So I think you have to have like all those aspects, because you could be someone that maybe has all the gadgets, has all the gear, and things go bad. The stuff starts to hit the fan, so to speak, and you just lose it because society's broken down, and then you're not eating because you're so scared or panicked or whatever. So I think it's just good to be prepared. And I think, as spiritual people, as Catholics and Christians, I think that our faith gives us a huge base for that, to help us prepare mentally and not just freak out. And we know that ultimately, regardless of how bad things get, God is on our side. I've had situations where, I've had to jump someone, that, in the grocery store or whatever. So, and they're like,
that was misbehaving, or?
No,
jump, just kidding.
Yeah, jump their car.
Welcome to the Rich Dawn, where eternal beatitude begins in this life. I'm Kyle Dean, and today I have with me Jeff Byrnes, a husband and father of 6, a practicing Catholic, and a suburban homesteader. Jeff, how are you today?
Doing well. Thank you, Kyle, for having me.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks so much for coming on, man. And so today, Jeff is going to share some wisdom with us about preparedness, mindfulness, and here on the Rich Dawn, week in and week out, when I life coach my clients, we talk strategy a lot. That ends up being a recurring theme, a topic that comes up. And one of those areas of life where you really need to have mindfulness, perspective, and a good strategy is this overall mindset of preparedness. Now, just to caveat for our viewers and listeners, we're not necessarily talking extreme survival or anything like conspiratorial, but honest to goodness, grounded preparedness. So we identified you as a suburban homesteader, and maybe you can open up by explaining for us, like, what does that mean, and what set you on this path of getting into this?
Yeah, so I would say it all started, I guess, when I was younger. So there was Y2K, and I just remember my parents just being kind of prepared for that, just buying some extra food and lanterns and things like that, just basic survival. If the perception was that the internet might go down and electricity might be lost, so just having some basic things on hand, extra food, lighting source, something, way to keep warm, things like that. Maybe something for defense, whether it be a firearm or some other item. But I just remember that. So that would have been right around, I think, like the 2000s. And then I could kind of, I've always been into camping and the outdoors, grew up with scouts before it got weird. So.
Yes, indeed. No kidding, man. Yeah, lots changed as men of faith over these times, but some things don't. I remember Y2K. I remember, my family was concerned about it as well. There was, of course, I feel like you're Gen Z, you might not know this, but everyone else does. The big concern was that computer programming was such that they didn't know if the numbers would roll over for the year, especially if there was like a 2-digit instead of a 4-digit, or that if it was 4 digits, instead of it kicking from 1999 to 2000, it might go to 1900 or 1800 or just something it wasn't supposed to do. And since everything was starting to become so reliant on the technology, they were concerned that like it was basically going to melt down and mess up the economy, mess up electricity and whatever else. That was wild. I remember we were at my uncle's house when New Year's was happening, and right at midnight he shut off all the lights in the house. Wow. My aunt freaked out. Everybody was, and thankfully it was okay. It was just a prank, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes there's these things, these unknowns, and they end up being the trigger points where it's like, we gotta, figure out what is reasonably within our control, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always good to have, obviously live in the moment, but it's always good to kind of prepare for the future, whether it's spiritually, financially, or in this case, just having some extra food and things that might be helpful if they're, it doesn't have to be something like a power outage. It could be a storm. We live here in Buffalo, so it could be, a blizzard or ice storm, or it could be, depending on where you live, it could be a tornado, a hurricane. Sadly, over the last couple of years, we've had a lot of civil unrest, so
Yeah.
things like that. So obviously, you're not going to go out there and be Superman or this vigilante, but it's good to just be prepared because as we've seen, even in like North Carolina with the recent hurricanes, they're still getting like bailed out there. So, like, if there's something that's really extreme in terms of a disaster, it can take the authorities and the government a long time to come bail you out. So if you're able to kind of like pull up your bootstraps and, be prepared and, kind of take some of that on yourself. And if you have a community, that's really helpful as well.
Yeah, 100%. I'm really glad you brought up the community aspect at the end as well, because, it is a group effort. I for one am really into, this topic as well, just because I just think it's cool. I remember when somebody taught once upon a time, it's like, you got to think about how you can't go more than, 3 seconds without space. Like if you're in outer space, you're done without a helmet. 3 minutes without air. 3 hours without heat. Like if you get like frostbite or if you're out in the cold. 3 days without water. 3 weeks without food. And if you think about it, that kind of covers all of the elements, like, fire, water, earth, air, ether, if you will. And when you have these like kind of quick ways to remember it, then you can build a system from there. Like, okay, food, water, shelter, defense, medical, clean air, having like a mask. So with that in mind, and also as you mentioned North Carolina, as we're shooting this now, we're like on day one of a ceasefire after what's apparently being called a 12-day war between Israel and Iran. Just quick hot take. How did you feel about that? This is a very apolitical podcast. That's just how I am. But certainly in the name of current events, there's a lot to maybe unpack as to why this topic is pertinent right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, sadly, I think that there's just been a lot of turmoil here in the U.S. With the recent election. And then just globally, you have the conflict in Ukraine, and then you have everything going on with Iran. I'm a big political kind of news junkie, so I'd like to be very up on current events. And I was pretty surprised that the U.S. Bombed Iran. That was something I think that was a little unprecedented. I think that they probably were pretty surprised that the U.S. bombed Iran. But I am very happy to see that hopefully, peace is going to come about out of this. So,
yeah, no question. And in the meantime, up until as of right now, the first day of having some semblance of that hope, yesterday was a different story. You know what I mean? There were a lot of bombs going back and forth. And I think that it would be naive of us to presume that for the rest of our lifetimes, just because we're on the other side of an ocean, that there could not be a day where bombs are flying in our space or drones. It's like, what is it? It's like spider webs, lions, and hammers. Oh my. Like, it's just like, it seems like there's a new operation every week happening right now. And with the spider web in particular, there's this idea that you can have a civilian trucker that just opens up and now all of a sudden there's all this stuff. And it's like, again, for me, I'm not into politics, but I do like to pay attention to current events. I grew up with a very hardline family that was like, hey, if you're not in the know, then you're ignorant. You want to be ignorant? You want to go through your life being ignorant? Kind of like that, intensive reverse psychology. Like, that's a choice. Sure. And it kind of makes you, if you take that well, it's, well, all right, well, I got to be informed. So, I kind of went that route where it's like, and then, but you also have to balance it with what's in your locus of control. You know what I mean? Like if a nuke flies, it's like, what did our Lord say? The living will envy the dead.
Sure.
So, it's got to be within a balance. But with all that in mind, I mean, so, I kind of laid out a little bit of my own understanding in terms of the elements and in terms of maybe categories of preparedness that you should focus on. Do you have any system like that that you operate by, or anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I definitely think that, focusing on those basic elements, obviously there's a lot of caveats, and you could spend, weeks and years on preparedness, essentially, in terms of like the different topics and
Sure.
subtopics, and people, one thing's better than another, and this approach is better. But I think it's just, it depends on like your level. If you're just starting out, if you're just starting to think, okay, things aren't exactly where I want them to be in my community or in my neighborhood or in my state, or the country or just in the world in general, you have the control to actually get out there and get the knowledge and, be prepared. So obviously, one thing to really ensure that you're also doing is being prepared in your spiritual life. So making sure you're getting to mass as often as you can, obviously on Sunday, getting to confession as often as you can, praying as a family. And then, it's also helpful. We touched on community before, but, you can obviously have anyone in your community if they're like-minded. You want to have obviously similar values in terms of, if things got bad, in terms of morality and those type of issues. But it's also really helpful to, if something happens, not only support each other in terms of building a fire or security or that, but also just being able to pray and have that hope and rely on that spirituality.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting because as you're saying that, what I'm hearing is you got to be evenly yoked. You know what I mean? That's not just true for a marriage, but not to get, too mystical with it, but as we all know, matrimony is actually a sign of Christ's love for his church. And in that sense, we're all called to be one, right? If one member suffers, all members suffer. So the more evenly yoked you are, the more organically you're going to be able to rely on each other in terms of like what is the code of conduct, right? And the code of conduct begins with things like the Decalogue, the Beatitudes. And when you don't have to like evangelize that to each other, it's kind of like already understood. Now, that being said, of course, we are called to evangelize as well. So it's interesting. There's always going to be that dynamic in terms of community relations. I know there's plenty of like, homesteading movements that have turned into like communes. Some of them go great. Some of them don't have the best reputation. I think maybe the difference between one that goes well and one that becomes cultish is the sanctity of the founder.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, because we call them religious communities or lay associations oftentimes, if it's the ones that go well, actually. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, if the founder of the organization or the preparedness group or homestead is, just focused mainly on themselves, and they, want to use it to have like this harem of women, not to put the Mormons down, but they're very into survival, and they have some kind of suspect beliefs in terms of polygamy and other things. So, but yeah, I mean, I think if you're grounding it in faith, and if you have the blessing of having a religious sister or a brother or a deacon or a priest that's among your group of people that are prepared or preparing, that's a huge godsend, especially in a time of crisis.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that may or may not be a part of it. I'm reminded of October 13th, 1973, Our Lady of Akita, had warned that there'll come a time, of course, it's bishop against bishop, cardinal against cardinal. I always like to joke that I think that was fulfilled in the era of Twitter. Like, it's just ridiculous out in the open. But also, she said that there will come a time when all you're going to have is your rosary and the sign from on high. So it's like the theologians have generally agreed that that indicates a time when you won't have regular access to the sacraments. So, and then Sister Agnes Eshigawa, the mystic of that, God rest her soul, she came out one final time, like the month before COVID took off, and was like, now is the time of sackcloth and ashes, pray your rosary every day. And then we did not have regular access to the sacraments anymore.
Yeah.
So that was a time period where people kind of had an opportunity to say, like, when things aren't normal, like, how am I going to respond to this? To what level am I going to adapt my strategy, if I have one at all, to, try to have something of a normal quality of life?
Yeah, that was a sad time in our history. First time in history where the church actually shut down and kind of cowered to the government. And even during the plague and the Spanish flu, the churches were open for people to pray. So I just think that hopefully, if we encounter something like that, the bishops and our religious leaders will stand up to the government and the different mandates. And if you're at church and you're praying and you get sick and you die, I mean, there could be worse ways to go.
Oh, no, no question. I mean, it's funny. I am a church minister, so I'm very deferential to my hierarchy. That being said, I'm friends with a ton of different priests and clergy, and many have said the same thing. Especially, you hear a lot of talk about these like JP2 generation priests that are coming up that are very orthodox, that very traditional. And that's what they yearn for, which of course all the statistics also make very clear that that's what young families yearn for as well. I mean, the numbers don't lie. And that's actually where we got the second half of the Hail Mary, was from the bubonic plague.
I
And that
didn't
was
know
like
that.
14th century, I think, 1300s, where they were, what was it, a third of Europe wiped out?
Yeah.
And so they actually added the second half to the Hail Mary. Pray for us now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Because there was a lot of death going around.
Yeah.
But they realized, the priests were like, we got to get the sacraments to people, because Christ said, don't worry about the first death, worry about the second death. So it's very important to have, like you says, even yokedness in terms of people that understand, the authentic faith expression and how important that is.
Yeah. And I think on that topic too, I think that, with the pandemic and the closure of the churches, it just was like a lot of fear. So, and as we know, fear does not come from God. And I just think, with this whole thing of, getting sick and, you know, spreading to people, we found out a lot of that wasn't accurate. And a lot of it was just more, seemed like more of a ploy to kind of like exert government control. So hopefully in the future, we'll know better and be prepared for what comes next. Having stronger communities and supporting our religious leaders and our local priest, so they can stand up and feel like they have the parish and parishioners behind them. But just in terms of, the pandemic itself, it's just good to be aware of different things. So, if you have a little bit of an understanding of medical things, then you can kind of, I wouldn't say you don't have to be a physician, but if you have a very basic understanding of how diseases spread and, what the limitations are of mask and things like that. So a lot of these individuals were told, to wear, these painter's mask essentially, which is really a dust mask. I mean, if you really wanted to prevent like viruses and stuff, you'd have to get into N95 and a fitted respirator and stuff like that. So some of that stuff, I think, in terms of like people I was following, initially a lot of people were pretty panicked initially when things happened, including myself. But, I had a plan in place as to how to respond to that. So, I had some, higher rated mask and, knew some different protocols on how to, had good hand washing, anytime there's any kind of illness. If you're out with people that are sick, it's good to, wash those clothes right away. So just some basic things, in terms of contamination and things like that. I think those are good to just have a general grasp of that. Because I think the more knowledge you have, whether it's faith-based or in this case in preparedness, it actually alleviates that fear because you actually are empowered. So you have, your faith to fall back on, or you have the skills and the training or the knowledge you've, spent the time learning and honing.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a couple of those like knot tying kits throughout my life. And I got to be totally honest with you, man. I've like not taken the time to master all of them. And when you're in the middle of a crisis, that's not a good time to like bust out that manual.
Yeah, nuts are hard.
you're gonna and that analogy rings true for every topic. So you touched on medical briefly. You should always have at least like they say like a like a trauma kit that EMTs would have, which of course comes with the knowledge that's prerequisite to say, do I know how to handle like a basic tourniquet? Do I know what to do, for X, Y, or Z scenario? Enough. And you got to kind of pick and choose your areas of expertise. Or I guess you could be a, jack of many trades and a master of few. But that's also where the fear can be alleviated because the knowledge empowers you. You're ready to go. But then you also find a community or a network that is collaborative with some of the areas that you're not as versed in, just like in normal life, right? Like for different people that want to take ownership of educating their children, or just recently I had a podcast on where somebody was quite convinced to be open to home birthing because they had like a quasi traumatic experience in the hospital where the staff were just not properly prepared.
Yeah.
And it's like, so you have to find that threshold of acceptability where you're going to say, look, I can't become an expert in everything, but if I find a good network of, like, for example, with homeschooling, different families that cooperate or collaborate, you've got different people that know different subjects, and then boom, you've got a well-rounded education.
Yeah.
Same thing with preparedness.
Yeah, and then you can, if you have somebody that has a expertise in a certain field, you can work and cross train each other. So if you're better in, say, gardening or homesteading, and then the other person's, has a medical background, they can help you cross train in terms of those things. The nice thing too is that there's a lot of resources. I mean, YouTube has a lot of really nice videos, and then like a lot of the different preparedness gear and that. There's like a lot of reviews in that. So it's always good to do your homework. If you're gonna, don't just run out and buy something. It's, I like to really research it first and, look at different alternatives. So say if you're looking for a fennel rod for, starting a fire, there's literally thousands of them. So you can get ones that are, fairly inexpensive, a couple bucks, which might be good to have. It's always good to have redundancy in anything you have for preparedness. Because if you lose something, something gets broken, or say you need to trade it for something else that's more essential, it's always good to have some redundancy. Obviously, you don't want to become a hoarder. Obviously, be respectful of that and your family's budget. So that's something that I have listed here as a prep hack. One thing is, you could spend a lot of money on preparedness, like any hobby. So you just want to be mindful of that you're being prudent in terms of your spending, and it's not, affecting your family or your other financial aspects. So that's important. But just do your research. There's a ton of different items out there. And I think in terms of just talking about being budget friendly, there's a lot of like options you can find, starting out, just basic camping things. So if you don't have a lot of, camping, if you don't have a sleeping bag or a tent or maybe a hatchet or axe, these are things you can find at estate sales or garage sales or consignment shops, and you can pick up really reasonably. And then obviously, you have Amazon, which is a great resource. Obviously, you want to make sure you, again, look at the reviews. But, you have like Prime Days and things like that, things that go on sale. One place I like is Ollie's Outlet. They have a lot of really miscellaneous stuff there. But they tend to, have like, if you're looking for tarps or like paracord or just general miscellaneous things you could use outside, first aid items, they usually have a lot of stuff that you can get relatively cheap. And also some of these books here you see on the table, I actually purchased there. So they have, a variety of different books. And that's one thing that's really helpful. Another preparedness hack is that we're very reliant on technology. I talked about YouTube being a great resource, but God forbid there's some kind of blackout, whether it's from, heat or EMP, which is electric magnetic pulse, or
Cyber attack.
Cyber attack. you wouldn't have access to those resources unless they were like, downloaded and backed up, or, had some alternative electric source. So having, a library or just some books on hand that you can reference is a great resource.
Yeah, 100%. And have you ever seen any of those television shows where they it's like survival, and you get X number of items, and you're either completely by yourself or in a very small team, and you just got to make it
Yeah, I
on
like
your
those
own?
shows. Yeah, like Alone.
Yeah,
And
yeah. That's my favorite, actually. It's so you've seen that one.
oh yeah.
So yeah, well, obviously we're not, endorsed by anybody and or any of these works here, but just enthusiasts and humble beginnings here with the podcast. But yeah, so for that particular theme that they go with, you get to pick 10 items, and you also have a 65-pound camera equipment that you lug around. Last person standing wins 500 grand. It's fantastic in terms of learning so much, because, okay, you really rely on those 10 items. A ferro rod is typically an item, one of those 10 items, right? It's a fire starter. But it's like you can go down the rabbit hole. You can have a ferro rod, but if you don't have the right kind of tinder, if you don't have the right kind of wood, if you don't have the right kind of conditions in terms of humidity, then you could end up still running into a challenge. Or if sometimes you'll see people they're scraping, and they're like using up their whole rod. And then other people are smart. They come up with ways to, instead of working against nature, you flow with nature. And there's ways to like build tinder boxes in ways that they just get that one little coal, and it's amazing what some of these people can do. They make containers. And so that's another strategy, is you can load up on knowledge, but then make it experiential. Don't just make it, you have to make it tactile,
Yeah.
right? Kinesthetic. But if you can become savvy enough in at least some of those categories, right? Again, like water, food, shelter, medical defense. If you can get to a place where you know how to just use the land or whatever's available to you, and you have fewer and fewer items, then you're really become like a master of the wilderness. So it's, the sky's the limit. I mean, there's so many different, and I like how you use the word hobby. It's like making it into a hobby. It doesn't mean that you're freaking out about a news cycle. It means that you're having fun. You're camping with your kids. You're making it a family adventure. And, like even something as silly as like learning how to use a piece of grass as a whistle, like just cool stuff. Like being able to know how to call animals. I've seen a guy the other day, he's using like the head of an acorn as a whistle.
Oh wow.
Yeah, just like different stuff where you make it your own, you make it your own. And then, but you be honest with yourself about which of those categories you're really good in. Because like you said, every single one of them has almost like an infinite rabbit hole. But then you also collaborate, you have conversations like we're having, and then you learn new tips and tricks.
Yeah. And I think too, like, if you're starting out or you're, a seasoned woodsman, shows like Alone, which is put on by the History Channel, and shows like that, some of like the Doomsday Preppers, some of that stuff is a little like hokey. Those
Sure.
people seem like they have like endless budgets. They got like, they got 500 four-wheelers, they got like a bunker, and, tens of thousands of dollars of food.
Or the people that like aren't wearing, enough clothing. I'm like, yeah, there's a bunch of different shows like that. I don't even name them, but as Catholics, we've got standards.
Yeah.
But some of them are very good.
Yeah, but I think the Alone one is a really good one too. It's just helpful too if you're looking for, additional tips or ideas on scenarios, because one thing you'll notice as the survivors go, as the time starts to add up, is one of the big things is the psychological aspect. You're out in your woods, you're trying to survive, you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. You don't know if you're going to be, be warm or you're going to be wet or whatever the elements are going to throw at you. It's that mental preparedness too. So it's not only, I think there's, three major elements, I guess, spiritual preparedness, physical preparedness, and then mental preparedness. So I think you have to have like all those aspects, because, you could be someone that, maybe has all the gadgets, has all the gear, and things go bad, the stuff starts to hit the fan, so to speak, and you just lose it because society's broken down, and then you're just, you're not eating because you're so scared or panicked or whatever. So I think it's just good to be prepared. And I think, as spiritual people, as Catholics and Christians, I think that our faith gives us a huge base for that, to help us prepare mentally and not just freak out. And we know that ultimately, regardless of how bad things get, God is on our side.
100%, man. And it's fascinating to reflect on that, because I've actually thought a lot about that psychological component. I've got a background in that as a part of my practice, and I've also, as an enthusiast, just looked into interesting shows. Like there's this like old school Twilight Zone episode that touches on this topic, where there's like the one family that actually prepared, and they've got like the bomb shelter and food or something or whatever it is that they've got.
So what about the hammering at all hours of the night? Ah, yes. The good doctor's bomb shelter. Well, I'm afraid we'll have to forgive him for all that.
But all the neighbors know about it, and none of them prepared. They were relying on them to, in case something happens. Oh, hey, we're like your best friend now. It's like, oh, really? And they ended up in this crazy scenario where they thought that, I think like a bomb was about to drop or something. Something was going to happen. And then all of the people ended up just psychologically breaking down. Like it was just not a good situation. And so then it led to an open-ended question, that kind of philosophical, like, what would you do if you were in this situation? Or what's the right way, the moral, the ethical way to handle this situation? And I think that people might be a little surprised to discover what the Catholic position on this is, because as a theologian, I wanted to look into it. There's a very well-trained theologian out there, Father Chad Ripperger, who is a colleague of mine in the deliverance field. He actually touched on this in one of his conferences. He was saying, you're actually not morally obligated to share your rations with other families if they did not prepare. And I think that if you don't know that, in terms of like being morally grounded, you would have people pull on your heartstrings and be like, oh, how can you call yourself a good Christian and this and that and whatever? And it's like, it kind of reminds me of the proverbial story of like, God helps those who help themselves, like where someone's standing on a rooftop and it's flooding and they're praying, God, just save me, save me, save me. And they get like 3 instances of like a canoe going by, a helicopter coming by. No, God will take care of me. And then they drown.
Yeah. I mean,
it's like,
I think God calls on us, he's going to give us the resources and the strength to do it. But, we can't just like lay on the ground and be like, all right, God, help me get this job, or help me, fix my roof, or that, we have to be actively engaged, as I think some saints have said, we are the hands of God. So, God is there helping us along the way, but we have to be active. And, it's just like anything, it's, you don't want to be envious and covet your neighbor's goods. So I think that that's kind of where this would fall. If you are unprepared and you have a neighbor or a family member that's been preparing and something terrible happens, I think in my situation, if I had the ability to, help other people, I would, but to a certain extent where, there has to be a cutoff. If I give away all my food and then I've been preparing and then my family can't eat, that's, that's a non-starter. So it's just,
right.
And I think, also, things like barter. So you could barter for goods, or say, for example, they didn't prepare, they don't have canned goods. Maybe they could do a task. They could, do some kind of labor or something like that. There's something that needs to get done in the community, and that could be payment for that labor or that activity. They might be, a mechanic, and they might not have prepared, but they might be able to fix the bicycle or whatever. That's the modes of transportation, or, kind of like chipping in. So it's not like you're getting this like free lunch, everyone's contributing.
Right. And that's also in the scriptures, right? Don't work, don't eat. if you're able-bodied, of course. Now, of course, social doctrine has, a heart for the needy, but at the same token, what you're touching on is called the principle of subsidiarity. And as practicing Catholics, we believe it's subsidiarity over solidarity. Now, it's both, right? Subsidiarity is you should be taking care of things at the local level, and it's hierarchical, right? You take care of your family first, right, and then friends and the rest of the community. It's kind of like it's a law of proximity, and it's subsidiarity. Now there's solidarity, right? Like solidarity is like more of a wider scope, but it has to start at the grassroots level, at the ground level, and the family is the building block of society. Now I'm preaching to the Reverend here if we were Protestants, because your father is six, my man. So how does that factor into, your hobbies, your interests? Like, do you get the kids involved, or like, do you have any advice in terms of like managing this hobby with a family, or including a family?
Yeah, I mean, good question. Yeah, so I think that one thing that I found helpful, as the kids get older, as they become teenagers, they become less interested. But I think that when your kids are young, just getting them outside, if you can, go camping and in a tent is ideal. But if you're not into tent camping, even just getting an RV or a cabin. But just getting outside, if you can find something like Fraternus or some Boy Scouts groups are still aligned with the church, with parishes, so they have a different charter than the national Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. Those are good. Just getting them out, if there's any kind of like nature, programs or things like that. Just getting out, being able to identify different plants, which is really good. When they're a little bit older, like, okay, these berries are poisonous. This is, something to be aware of. They might look like they're tasty, but these are not raspberries. These are poison berries. And then, explaining, birds and animals can eat them, but they have, a little bit different digestive than tracts than we do. So I think engaging your kids at that level when they're younger, and just getting them outdoors, just talking to them about, preparedness, getting them involved. Another area that we haven't talked about yet is just having a bug out bag. So that's something I've incorporated since they've been young, is I have a bug out bag for all the kids. So when they're really young, so maybe they were 3 or 4, I helped create the backpack with them. So they have a backpack, and it has maybe stickers in it and some fun band-aids and a flashlight, things that are, it's not real heavy for them, but they feel like they're engaging, and the things that are in there are safe for them.
And just to clarify for anyone who doesn't already know, a bug out bag is like, or a go bag as it's also called, is like, it's packed, it's ready in case you got to go.
Right.
And it sounds like the stickers are more for that psychological wellness.
Yeah, or some treats, some snacks, whether it's a granola bar, just some comfort things, to have, because if you did have to, for some reason, leave your house in a hurry, with young kids, obviously, or anyone, it's good to have some of those creature comforts to go back, again, on that psychological aspect. If things are really bad, it's nice to, maybe, if you're walking down the road, or, gathering food or trying to collect water, maybe having a stick of gum would just, really lift your morale, in terms of, things are going on, or, piece of candy, or, if it's your kid, having like a stuffed animal or stickers in there to, just give them something to distract them from what might be going on.
Yeah. And sometimes I have military clients, and, they go through some pretty intense stuff, and sometimes you have to work through trauma. And if it is a tough time, or let's say, a bomb goes off or something like you just really don't know how to prepare for this. Well, you can learn from, our brothers and sisters in the armed forces, and from the trainings that they get. Obviously, they go through Hell Week, they go through boot camp and all this other stuff. One of the things that the military is trained on, in case something really traumatic like that happens, is they're actually told, just take apart your pistol and put your pistol back together. something that is tactile, that is a part of your daily regimen, whatever that is. And obviously, as a civilian, you should adapt that for what makes sense for your state in life. But if something big is going down, like you said, just chew gum and take a walk, whatever that thing is, whatever that routine is, if there's a way that you can, under the circumstances, experience that or experience a modified version of that, sometimes that's all you have to do in order to just like work through the shell shock in the moment and then kind of put the pieces back together and then get back in the zone, so to speak. So, I mean, sometimes even just like, again, knowledge is power. Having an awareness or an understanding of things like that literally kind of gives you the empowerment. And then all of a sudden, it's like, you're never going to know when you're going to find yourself in a situation like that, but you have a bit more of a peace of mind just knowing that, you're ready for a lot more than somebody that maybe doesn't think with that mindset.
Yeah, and I think too, if you're talking to your kids about maybe, what's this, what do we do if there's a fire in the house? Where should we meet? Just having a basic, exit plan for something like that. Or, okay, there might be a storm coming up. So obviously, depending on the age of your child and, how they are, you don't have to tell them all the nitty gritty details, but, just sharing that with them and letting them know that, you're prepared. Oh, Dad, why are you getting out, those flashlights, or, why are you getting those candles out? Oh, well, we have a storm that might be coming up. So they're aware. And then if you can, get them to help you, get stuff out, or, just talk to them about what it's for. That also, they feel empowered so that they're helping. And also it takes away that fear factor because they have a little bit of knowledge, and then you can always build on that as they grow older. And then hopefully that'll continue, and, they'll continue on and share that with their friends and, their families.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I'm gonna have to edit that a little bit because I'm talking about bombs dropping and we're talking about kid-friendly stuff.
I think it should be fine.
Well, it's wild stuff, and obviously you got to make it age appropriate, right? I mean, and I really appreciate your fatherly wisdom that you're sharing with that, because obviously you're not going to share some things depending on what the circumstances, and it's all about right proportion. That obviously, if a storm's coming, that's benign in the grand scheme of things, but it could be anything. And, at the end of the day, like you said, the more prepared you are, that is its own psychological comfort in a certain sense. Because, and you have to think about this soberly, because if there's a location that you need to go to, well, if the situation at hand is that there was some sort of an EMP, electromagnetic pulse is going to take out the grid.
Yeah.
And it could be for a prolonged period of time. Now, as long as your vehicle isn't overly reliant on electrical, gas-powered mechanical things will still function in a situation like that. So you can go somewhere, but you're not going to be able to necessarily just pick up the phone and tell your family members like, hey, this is where we're going to go. Yeah. So that's why having the preparedness helps. Because it's like anything else. It's like when you set up your credit card and you're like, look, just set up the auto payments because I don't want to constantly be nagged for having an overdraft. Mm-hmm. It's like you set it and you forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked about mentioned the EMP a few times, where you'll lose, whether it could be a solar flare or it could be, God forbid, some kind of nuclear weapon that's detonated in the atmosphere, which would cause some kind of huge electrical pulse that would kind of disable a lot of electronics, including cars and radios and computers and things like that aren't protected. But I brought with me this book here. It's called 1 Second After. It's a fictional book. It was a New York Times bestseller. But if you're just getting into preparedness and not sure what to expect, this is a really good starter. I would recommend, probably, 16 and older in terms of reading it. I mean, it's not really, there's nothing sexually inappropriate in the book itself, but it just has some, strong adult themes and kind of, kind of gets into a little nitty of gritty about what could happen if society breaks down and some scenarios. But the book is neat because it does, as it's kind of going through the story and the characters, it actually does like kind of point out some different things that the characters are using, like different survival techniques or gear that they mention by name. So,
And speaking of which, you got some other stuff here too. Like what is this?
so I brought, this is one of the multi-tools. So this is a SOG multi-tool. So like we talked about with the a show Alive or Alone, sorry.
Yeah.
You know, it's good to have resources that you can use in multiple capacities. So redundancy. So this has got, you know, pliers on it. It has a saw. It has screwdrivers, and has numerous different things on here that can help you in terms of a survival scenario. But something like this would be, you know, this might be a little bit more of an expensive prep or item that you might purchase. Might go for about, you know, anywhere between $50 to $100, but you can get these on sale. But really nice resource. It breaks down, and you can, it has a pouch you can put it on, so you can carry it on your belt. So great for, you know, stuff around the house, great for camping. And if something bad happened, this would be a really powerful resource. Also, in terms of spiritual preparedness, I have the Fulton Sheen's Wartime Prayer Book. So a little book that's got some prayers in there and inspiration in terms of spiritual warfare. And just, you know, it might be something that's handy. You could throw it in your go bag or your bug out bag, and just give you some inspiration, you know, like we're talking about in terms of the mental, taking a mental break, you know, having some comfort in some prayers. I got a book here just about nuclear war. So obviously we have, hopefully this is a, you know, worst case scenario, but I mean, there is a lot of talk about, you know, nukes and dirty bombs and things like that. So just maybe having a basic understanding of how that works. Obviously, you know, I'm not saying to go out and build a bunker, but just having some basic ideas of how that works. And then some other books here, Prepare for Anything. It's a survival manual. There's a lot of these books. They're like really nice because they're easy to read. They have a lot of different topics in here about radios and first aid and homesteading. So just picking up some books like this, like I said, can be a great resource to have on hand. And also just reference, you know, because if you're in a crisis, you're not going to sit down and read 50 books. So, you know, if you have a couple minutes here and there, you know, pick up a book, read a chapter, familiarize yourself with a certain topic maybe you're not so familiar with. It can be a really great resource. So, you know, just having some books like this on hand, you know, is great, especially in a time of need, you know, where you can't run to the library and maybe the internet's not working.
Yeah. Yeah. You're reminding me of some of the recent like real estate listings that have been out there. I don't know if you've seen some of these news clippings where they're like, oh, get a nice bunker, get a nice bug out shelter from the Soviet Union era, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's a cool $7 million. You know, if you guys have $7 million extra dollars laying, or well, whatever it is, sometimes it's in the, you know, it's in the tens of millions, and you're like, wow, that would be interesting to live like that. You know, I guess you'd have to get like a lot of lights, some sort of a light therapy, you know, like you'd have to go through a regimen, just like people up in outer space. Like we're not made for being underground, and we're not made, just like we're not made to be alone.
Yeah.
Which is why some of those people, it's like they really can't get over their mental health. The mental health is what ends up taking them out. They're doing fine with food. They're doing fine with whatever, shelter, but they just start all of a sudden really missing a family member and they tap out.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of people that can go down these rabbit holes. I've seen these things where it's almost like a timeshare where you can pay like a monthly fee, and then you have like essentially a a bed or a bunk or, a meal plan if things went bad.
Oh, so you get like a little space within a giant
Yeah, almost
communal
like,
shelter?
Yeah, so yeah.
Oh, sign me up. Let's go.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of an interesting concept. And then, some of these places they get together, once a year and they, meet with the people that are kind of sharing that, space or whatever. So
That's cool until all of a sudden it turns into like a Hunger Games District 13. You're like, wait a minute, what did I sign up for here?
yeah. So I mean, some of that stuff is like you can get into the weeds. That's why I mean the Doomsday Prepper show that was really popular. It's entertaining, but like most of those people, it just seems like they have 90% of them have like endless budgets, and that's for most people that's not practical. So,
and also it's probably not how it's going to go down. This is one reason that I love as a man of faith. I'm just so grateful for the gift. That's a gift. I mean, that could be taken away from anybody, and that's something that you pray and you ask for. And if you're confused about that aspect of this conversation, just that's what you bring to God then. Just be like, God, I'm not sure if I believe what these guys are talking about. But when you get there, when you have that, I've looked into a lot of these Catholic approved prophecies. That's definitely one of the spiritual gifts that I bring to the table. And they talk about how it's like, what's going to happen is not something that you're going to be as able to prepare physically for. Like I'm talking about things like, there's people go back and forth about whether the illumination of conscience is going to happen or this or that. But regardless, one thing that's for sure, whether or not there's some specific event historically coming up, your world ends when you die.
yeah.
That's something that is going to be true for all of us. Unless you're the next Enoch, that or the Elijah, you're just going to take a chariot off to heaven. The odds are very against you, billions and billions and billions of people to one. But it's like, that's why it's important for us to have that faith perspective, because it also tempers you from going overboard, whether or not you've ever going to have that kind of a budget.
Yeah, you can't bring your preps with you. So
No, you can't. Yeah, it reminds me, I was at a dentist appointment one time, and my dentist just shared this hilarious joke with me, and it was just like, somebody with means, they pass away, they go to the gates, the pearly gates, they see St. Peter, he's getting ready to let him in, check out the place, check out heaven, and he's like, wait a minute, before we go, I'm a prominent person. I had something really important I needed to go get. Can I please, can I go back and can I bring it with me to heaven? And they were like, all right, fine, go ahead. What do you got? So he goes back and he gets to his house and he grabs a couple items, puts them in his bag, comes back, gets ready to go to heaven. And they let him in. Of course, they got to check his bags. So they look into it, and he pulls out these bricks of gold. And, the angel's looking in, checking them, and he turns to St. Peter. He's like, can you believe it? This guy brought concrete. Whatever we got, it's going to be, eyes has not seen, ears not heard what God has in store for us, Yeah. But, it's, I probably butchered it a little bit, but it's perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, you definitely have to keep things in perspective. I think that's, we touched on it earlier, but I think that's another topic just to touch on again briefly is that, you and I were, really into just kind of current events and obviously the topic of preparedness and homesteading and, just trying to be preparedness minded and things we do and both physically we do Systema together, so training in terms of martial arts and just for physical health and just having a good time as well, but also just I think that there is a detriment where there's I kind of call it ostrich syndrome, where there's a lot of people that we encounter whether it's at work or in the church or just in daily life where they just, see things going on, and instead of like actually reacting and trying to take a little bit of control over the situation, they just stick their head in the sand. We saw that a lot going back to COVID. The government is like shutting everyone down. They're shutting the churches, they're restricting all this stuff. And, later on we find out the government officials that are pushing all this stuff, they're just kind of doing whatever they want, but they're, they're telling us you gotta be, 10 feet apart, you gotta wear your mask, you gotta get, all these, questionable, things that might not be so good for your health, in terms of injections. So you just got to be careful, in terms of that. So obviously you don't want to go down the rabbit hole where you're, got your tinfoil hat on and you're like, it's the end of the world, Chicken Little. But I think it's good to be mindful of things that are going on around you, and that way you can prepare, whether it's, preparing, with the rekindling of the church, whether, the situation in your diocese, being prepared there, talking to people, trying to make things better, as well as, being prepared in terms of your physical health. So I think that's a big aspect too. So, you can have a lot of gear, but I mean, if you can't physically carry it, or you can't, help your family, you can't protect them if there's a situation where you have to, confront someone, or, carry gear, or someone's injured, you have to help them, trying to be physically prepared in terms of your body itself, in terms of exercise, and that, stamina and strength are going to be helpful as well. I think in terms of a crisis.
I was praying about that before we got prepared for this podcast. We have similar views in certain areas, and in other areas, like I said, I don't care about the politics, but I do care about paying attention to what's kind of coming, and exercising the sub virtue of prudence, of foresight, circumspection. I mean, these things are very important. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of that, like striking that balance, finding that balance. I think we kind of already touched on it a little bit in this conversation, in the sense of, like, how do you do this in a healthy way? And I think that, you just think of it like hygiene, right? We've already kind of touched on that. It's like having good mental health, having good physical health, having good spiritual health. That's hygiene, right? Having good hygiene. How do you get the kids involved in a way that's, you're not going to freak them out or give them some weird complex, right? Like,
Yeah.
No, it's like, hey, we're camping, or hey, a thunderstorm's going to come. This is what you do. This is how you don't just like, you just throw your hands in the air, like, and you don't just try to hobble something together at the last second. No, you are prepared. That's what this is. Or even if you're like, getting, we didn't say this yet, but I'll throw this out there as well for the kids. Like if you're going to get like a pet, or an ant, like a rabbit, or livestock or something, like chickens or something, you set it up for them, and then you help them to realize, like, see, they've got a shelter. They need heat. Here's a lamp. They need water. They need food. They need a place to live, something over their head. It's like, these are the things that make for life, and then they get excited. It's like a science class.
Yep.
So that's one way to do it. But I guess I wanted to ask you, for maybe some of the older people, or those people that you just touched about, that seems like maybe get along in certain areas. Some people, it's like, they say, all right, weather and sports, that's what's safe to talk about. Then you feel people out, you get to learn a little more about them and see whether you have something deeper. But then other people say religion and politics, those are the two things to avoid like the plague, no matter what, especially at work, and this and that. I'm not into politics. Obviously, we're deep men of faith. I'm big into the faith, but it's like, I just remember any and every consequential philosopher that's ever existed throughout history would absolutely scoff at that concept. Whether or not you're at work, It's like, no, those are actually the most important conversations that actually mean anything for anyone that wants to talk about legacy. So that requires fortitude. That requires a real perspective of knowing what kind of head you got on your shoulders. But the reality is then there's everyday reality. There's the people that you're going to inevitably run into. They don't see it that way. Maybe they will, maybe they won't ever. And that's my question for you. I want to kick the football back your way here. It's like, without trying to proselytize or try to convert people in a subject that they may or may not ever get into, whether they see it at the level of hobby or whatever clicks for them. It's like, how do you think that could work or should work, or to what extent do you try to help somebody to come to that healthy realization that, like, you know what, maybe there's even just at a minimal level something that I could or should be doing better in terms of hygiene in a certain area, that until it was presented to me in this way, or in light of this current event, that they weren't seeing it before. Because I think there is hope for people. It's like, it's like talking about election cycles every 4 years or 2 years, when people are like, these are the principles behind voting, without telling you who to vote for. These are the principles. Sometimes I'm like, I don't want to hear it anymore. I know them. But then I have to remember, yeah, but you know what? There's people that have never heard this before.
Yeah.
And those are the people that we're asking the question for. So what would you say to them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think that, and what I try to do is I try to introduce it subtly. So, as we're called to, evangelize the faith, I think that sometimes it's faith through action. So, for example, like, we haven't talked about, there's a term called everyday carry. So for me, I try to carry different items on me every day, depending on the situation. Like I try to carry a pocket knife with me, if I'm going to like a federal building or something like that, or depending on the scenario, obviously I would have to take that off. But, and then just, on my keychain, I have a couple like little tools that are on there. I have some paracord that I have with me, that's on my keychain. And then, in my work bag, I have like a first aid kit, and I have a multi-tool and some different things like that. So, just being at work, or just being out, I've encountered different people. Like just recently at the office, somebody was trying to cut something, and no one had any scissors because of all the influx with shifting around from people having physical desks. Now everyone's like desk sharing, kind of as a result of COVID. So no one has any scissors or stapler or anything like that. So one of my coworkers was trying to cut this cord, and he didn't have anything. And he's like, "Oh, Jeff, I thought you usually have a knife." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, here you go." And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "That's cool that you carry that knife. How long you been carrying that?" I'm like, "Since high school." So, and it's just, become second nature. Some people are like, "Well, that's like a little scary." I'm like, "Well, it's not scary. It's a tool."
Wait. So people actually say that to you?
Yeah.
It's scary that you have a knife on you?
Yeah.
Have we really become that effeminate as a society?
Like, well,
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to call anyone specifically out, but that's amazing.
They're like, "Are you allowed to have that in the workplace?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not stabbing anyone with it. I mean, I could stab you in the eye with a pen, and it could be as effective as, getting stabbed with a knife."
So, or like an ice pick.
Yeah.
So, you could chisel anything out of anything.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes you get these snide remarks, and, I think for some that would be where you could get offensive or defensive.
I could see it at a workplace,
but, I just use it as a tool to educate. So I'm just like, I carry this, whether it's, I need to cut something, or, God forbid, who knows what it is. But I mean, it, throughout the day, I'll be out in the garden. I might have to, cut a plant, or cut a zip tie, or whatever it is. And I'll have to go in the house and get something. And then, I've had situations where, my kids have gotten something wrapped around their wrist or something like that, and it's cutting off circulation. So, very carefully, cut that, or, just a lot of like different practical applications. But it's just like with preparedness, if something, say, God forbid, something happens and you're at the office or you're at the grocery store, you might not be able to get back to your house to get your go bag and all your gear and all your props. So it's good to have some things on your person. We live in New York State, so some of the things you'd see maybe some people in other states, like maybe a firearm. Some people carry that as an everyday carry. A flashlight is good to have if you can carry that. Obviously, it's relying on, you don't want to carry a ton of stuff, but if you can add, they have like these little credit card things you can have that has like, a little saw or fishing hook. So there's a lot of like neat little gadgets you can have, put things on your keychain, where you can have them at a moment's notice.
So what I'm hearing you say right now is, in terms of getting people introduced to it, is actions speak louder than words. It's, hey, I'm that guy that's prepared, and it helped you.
Yeah.
So I like that answer because obviously you can have the conversations, you feel people out, and some people just gravitate more on certain things, right? That's just organic. But then there's a real world scenario comes up and it's like, hey, we need something for this.
Yeah.
And interesting. So
Yeah, or
that's
even just somebody, at work in the past, somebody's cut themselves and I have a first aid kit, it's a small, cloth, first aid kit, but I, provide them with a Band-Aid and antiseptic wipe. And they're like, wow, this is something you carry. I'm like, yeah, I have, one in my car. I got a couple in my house, it's, never know when you're going to have it. So,
but I could see that turning into a dependency complex where people just look at you as the go-to. So how do you convert that as well?
well, I mean, it just, I think if you use it as a point of education that you're not just like the, dispenser of things, but, I say, oh yeah, if you can put this in your car or things like that. So, I've had situations where, I've had to jump someone, that, in the grocery store or whatever. So, and they're like,
That
"Oh,
was misbehaving or?
no, jump,
Just kidding.
yeah, jump their car." So, and one thing that I found, just because I just watched these little videos or whatever,
Sure.
different preparedness items, and there's just like a lot of cool stuff. Now you can get a car starter. It's about the size of a cell phone, and it has little the jumper cables that plug into it, and it's about yay big, and it can start a diesel truck.
No way.
Yeah,
I
and
didn't
you
know
just
that.
literally clip it on, and it.
See, this is real world information sharing where it's like,
Yeah.
aha.
And then the people are like, "Whoa, what is that?" And I'm like, "Well, this is something that's gonna do away with AAA jump start in your car. You can get one off of Amazon for like $30,
No way.
and you can also use
How does it charge?
It's USB, so it's a USB battery pack, and it usually has like a flashlight on there.
So this is instead of having the red and the black?
Yeah, so it actually has a battery pack. So it's like a USB battery pack that has, I don't know, so many charges or whatever. And then it also has ports where you could charge your cell phone or other USB devices. And then it
doubles as
actually
a battery
has
redundancy.
Yeah, so then it has a plug on there where you actually have the red and black clips that would go into the battery.
Wow. That sounds versatile. And it also removes the need to like pull another vehicle in and
Yeah, and the jumper cables, I mean, they're kind of like a little,
They're
clunky. So
yes.
and then
Wow,
if you don't
thank
do
you.
it right, it could cause issues with your car and
As you listen to this podcast, take a moment to pause and reflect. Are you feeling stuck, seeking purpose, or longing for deeper fulfillment? Transformation can't happen through passive listening alone. At The Rich Dawn, we offer personalized coaching to help you define and align your goals with God's plan for your life. Whether you're looking for spiritual growth through the 9 levels of prayer, advancing in your career, or pursuing personal transformation, let's work together to unlock your full potential and live with clarity, peace, and purpose. Your best life is waiting. Awaken to your rich dawn. Start your journey today at therichddawn.com. That's therichddawn.com.
Great experience, give it a shot if you ever have the opportunity.
See, now when I'm the person that learns something like that, I need to be like, okay, now I'm actually going to go implement that in my life, right? See, that's how you take care of that. So, all right, so we've laid a pretty good groundwork here of like why this should be a part of any man's life to some extent.
Yeah,
it's a part of
women too. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Like
I get the whole family involved.
100%. But I mean, in terms of like being a provider and a protector, you mentioned firearm safety. Maybe that's something we can touch on in a little bit here. But yeah, I mean, because that would fall under like defense or offense, whatever people want to categorize it as. But like, then there's, like we said, there's water. Let's go through it just real quick. Maybe we can kit and play for a second. Water, right?
Okay.
Oh, you actually
I've
prepared for this.
Yeah, I've got a few things.
Well, then you start, and if there's anything you don't mention that I know of, I'll throw it in there too.
Yeah, I just tried to write down some notes about different categories, just some things that I found, through trial and error over the years.
Yeah.
And I tried to focus on things that are fairly budget friendly and also can be, have multiple uses. So for fire down, I have the fennel rod, which we mentioned. It's essentially this magnesium, and you scrape little pieces off it. It's real helpful in starting a fire, and even if it's wet, it can still start a fire because it burns really hot when you get those flakes. Having the knowledge of how to make a fire, the elements of fire, so that obviously going back to being kid friendly, obviously if your kids are young, you probably don't want to teach them how to make fire, but once they get to a certain age, obviously that can be something that's helpful if you're having a cookout or just like a bonfire in the backyard, having them help you build the fire. That's, a life skill. In addition, something as simple as just having a baggie, like a lunch baggie with some cotton balls and Vaseline. That's a really powerful fire starter. So if you have your fennel rod or you have just a basic Bic lighter, that'll get a fire going super easy for you.
My standard issue Zippo.
Yep, Zippo.
Oh,
Zippo's
man.
great. American Icon.
Yes. Windproof.
Yeah, something also helpful, just something to procure wood, whether it's a solid fixed blade knife or a hatchet or axe. Probably in a survival situation, unless you're at a fixed-based camp, probably a hatchet would probably be easier to carry in like a backpack because you want to be mindful of weight. Because you can't, carry around 1,000 pounds. If you're in a car, then you have a little bit more capacity. But if for some reason you have to go by foot or by, wagon or bicycle, you want to be, mindful of weight.
I got one that fits on my belt. Sometimes I use that as a part of my everyday carry.
Yeah.
It's so nice.
Yeah.
You just have it at the ready when you need it.
Yeah. It could be used for, fire. It could be used for building a shelter.
Hammer.
Creating other tools.
Hammer. When you flip it around on the back, flathead, just metal.
God forbid, you'll a little jest if zombies come, it could be helpful.
You got your blunt option and your bladed option.
Yes. So, and then we talked about water. So one thing I found that's really helpful and budget friendly is either a water straw or a Sawyer, mini Sawyer. So it's essentially the straw, and you can either attach it to a water bottle or you could drink directly from a stream. So one thing, if you're out in nature, whether you're hiking, you're going out for a jog, if you're really thirsty, you don't want to just drink typically from just a creek or lake because there could be protozoa or other bacteria in there. So having some kind of water filter, and these are nice. You can get, a bulk pack for, 3 or 4 of them for $20 or $30. But it filters like thousands of gallons of water, per one of these little filters, and they're only about yay big. So, something you could fit in your pocket, you could fit in your backpack.
What is this called again?
Either a mini Sawyer, it's Saywer, or there's a survival straw is another one.
The straws are the ones I'm familiar with.
Yeah,
that's it.
So the Sawyer is also, you can use it as a straw, or it actually has a threaded thing, so you can actually attach it to a standard like water bottle you'd get from like the store, grocery store.
And which you can fill with whatever kind of water.
Yeah. So
Got it.
Typically in that scenario, you'd be using like some kind of stream or outdoor water for those particular items.
Are those rated for toxicity as well? Or do you have to be careful that the water source does not have chemicals?
Yeah, I mean, you want to be careful of your water source. So, I mean, obviously, one thing, if you're not familiar, if you see like dead animals or the water stagnant, you want to try to avoid that.
Oh, yeah.
It's best if you can find
malaria or the
free flowing water, or if it's, like a lake or pond, if it's, water that's moving, you don't want to try to, if you can, try to get water when you're putting it in your filtration device. If you have one that doesn't have like the algae or, dirt and stuff in it.
Yeah. And look, again, it's one of those, you get what you pay for. You can get really high rated ones that can help you even with chemical, but most of them probably aren't at that level. So, which speaks back to the awareness, situational awareness.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in the city and you're like, your only source of water is like maybe by a factory, try to be careful, try to find, water that's free flowing. But I guess in terms of ultimate survival, as we talked about before, having water is a, survival necessity. So, but you want to try to, get the cleanest water possible.
Yes.
Also
more upstream, the better.
Yeah. And then in addition to that, there's something called aqua tabs. There's like these little tabs. It's almost like a Alka-Seltzer, and you put it in the water, and that will clean out a lot of like chemicals and any kind of like bacteria that in there. Those take a little bit longer. You have to usually let the water sit, but those could be really. It's like in a blister pack, so super easy to carry. You can have it in your pocket, your backpack, your car. These are things that I think that in terms of the survival straw or the mini Sawyer, you should probably have one of those on hand for every family member because they're pretty reasonably priced, and that would be something to really good to have in that backpack or go bag, or even have one, God forbid, in your car. So a car, your vehicle that you're driving around in, whether you're driving to work or the minivan or whatever it is you're driving, it's good to have just a bag kind of pre-positioned there for you, because if you're out and about and something happens, you have that to fall back on. So
Right.
Another good reference. Then if you're at your house, if you're bugging in, they call it. So if you're staying in place, if something's happening.
Oh, staycation.
Yeah, staycation. Yep. Just having some containers to either gather rainwater, or also just in the homestead mindset, if you can get a rain barrel. So a lot of cities and municipalities have like programs where you can actually get food grade rain barrels really inexpensively. Or what I did was I actually reached out to Coca-Cola and these different other places. A lot of times they put the syrup in these food grade barrels. So like they put the syrup in there for like different sodas and such. And then you can usually get them for like 10, 15 bucks. And they're 55-gallon barrels. So the ones that are food grade will be like a blue. And they usually say food grade, because you want to make sure if you're getting a rain barrel, you want to make sure it doesn't have any pesticides or other chemicals in there, because that can stay in the barrel after the fact.
Yeah, they usually say HDPE recycling number 2. I think maybe 4 or 6 as well. Yeah, the blue is nice because it keeps out the sun. If you have UV that hits the barrel, the plastic will leach over time in the whatever it is that you're storing. And then they do have them in natural white and black as well. Mm-hmm. Which black you have to be especially careful if it's going to get hit by the sun, but it definitely blocks out UV. Yeah. And then the white is, some people like that because you can see the liquid levels, mm-hmm. but you especially got to keep it out of the sun. Yeah. So, blue is a nice happy medium.
Yeah. And then also too, if you're getting into it and you have the space, like I have some, they have, essentially it's like a jug of water, and you can have that on hand. So you have some water that's shelf stable and potable available, and you can get these little like drops you put in there, and it preserves it for 5 years or whatever, and then you're supposed to date it. But that's probably another layer of survival, but it's good to have it on hand, especially like by me, I would have to travel probably a little bit of a distance to get fresh water if it's not coming from rain, because I'm not near any natural water sources. So depending on where you are, another key point or, preparedness hack is it's good to have a local map of your area, topographic map, or just have a general idea of where different things are. If you're in the city, if the water's still running, things got really bad, you could access your fire hydrant. You can get a key that you can access different water spouts.
What do you mean your fire hydrant?
Well, you could turn the fire hydrant on if you need water.
You mean like I was picturing in your house.
No.
Okay, I'm with you now.
Yeah. So if
that's really if it's extreme, huh?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you have to be resourceful. So I mean, there's different options for,
no question. Well, and one thing in your home would be the hot water tank.
Yep, hot water tank.
40 gallons, 50 gallons, right, available then. Now, if you're in wintertime, as long as gas is still working, you're going to be cutting into heat, which is, it's you have to negotiate. You have to make those decisions.
Yeah, but I mean that's something to, water is, also you have to think about is obviously a heavier resource. If you have to carry it, you're probably not going to lug around some jugs of water if you're walking or whatever. So
right, and which to that point, actually, for anyone that's like, my goodness, they're talking about water barrels all of a sudden. Yeah. And here's why. 55 gallons. Okay, you says you've got 6 kids. They say you're supposed to have a gallon of water a day per person. That's to drink. That's not including for making food. That's not including for taking a bath or bathing in some capacity, cleanliness. That's not for cooking. That's just for drinking.
Yeah.
So 55 gallons divided by how many people and how many days, you're talking maybe a week's supply.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, is that, I think that the rain barrel, maybe 10 years ago, that might have been more of a crazy concept. But I think that now,
Oh, I agree.
for me, I try to use a rain barrel for filling up just a watering can just for the garden.
Oh, yeah. And rainwater is actually way better for plants than chlorinated water.
Yeah.
Yeah, the hose water.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one thing
It's got
that
more nutrients.
Yeah, we are lucky because some of the Midwestern and Southern states is actually illegal for you to collect water.
Well, that's...
So I mean,
I mean, what is that Latin term that St. Augustine said? Justitia, something, something. Is that even a just law?
No, it's definitely not just.
Well, I don't know.
God's given us the water, and if you're hoarding it, maybe but
I guess if there's people that they always say the bad apple ruins it for the bunch. If there's someone that's like hoarding malaria in their backyard and it's becoming a hazard for your neighbors, that's one thing. But you have to be responsible, just like anything.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable, huh?
Yeah, and you're just trying to be conservation minded. If you're saving some water to water your garden, I mean, ultimately it's going to go back into the ground anyway. So,
Yeah, man.
I think it's if you're living in California and your grass is already brown and you're watering it excessively, obviously that's could be a problem. But
could be. I don't think they would call that grass anymore.
Yeah.
If it's that brown,
Yeah, but water is definitely something to think about. Just another area too, especially with the family, is just having a good water bottle. Whether it's for sports or just going out somewhere. Having that and having the kids used to filling up their water bottle before they go out is a really good, one of those things that might not seem like it's survival minded, but it actually is because, those that have kids, how many times have you been in the car where you're going somewhere and be like, I'm thirsty. I'm so thirsty. Where's the water? And if they have their own water bottle and they get accustomed once they're old enough to filling that, that could be a great resource. If you're, whether you're just out and about, you're going to some kind of event, you're going to a sporting event, you're going to church, you'd have that with them. And then, if something happened, they had to grab it, they would know where it is. And, kind of having that habit to have on hand.
Oh, there's nothing like self-sufficient kids, dude.
Yeah.
That's the way to raise them.
Yep. So, I mean, that's, so then the next area that I'd like to touch on is the shelter. So obviously, right now, you're in a house, you're in an apartment, so we have that, thanks be to God, but if there is a scenario where you had to essentially leave your home or leave where you are and you're essentially on the road, you want to be able to provide some kind of shelter from the elements, whether it's, the wind, whether it's rain, cold. So just having some basic items, just having a tent. Most tents are 3-season, but I mean, you can, supplement some of that with having a sleeping bag and blankets and some other things, to enhance that. But also, something basic like a Mylar blanket, could be something that's helpful, to, whether it's, putting on someone that's cold, or you can use it to make some kind of tarp or shelter. So it has multiple functions there. Also just, having some basic, you can go to places like Harbor Freight and get some tarps, and just having some paracord or string could be helpful, making all kinds of different things in a survival situation, but also, making a shelter or some place, to make it a little bit more comfortable if you're out there in the elements. So, and there's, numerous things you can get into, like, if you're depending on the climate, you could have like hammocks. I've seen that as a thing where you can have everyone have a little hammock so they have a little bit more comfort. So maybe they're off the ground.
Yeah. Which is not only for comfort, but also to avoid bugs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if in the winter, this is rabbit hole territory, but you see some of those YouTube videos where people are out in the sticks in the dead of winter and they convert in their tent like a little stove with piping that goes out the tent with like a chimney.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just unbelievable what you can do. But realistically speaking, you also have to think of defense.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's not just, you know, camping or glamping, but it's like survival, then there's supplementing the tent with foraging, right? Like natural, like even like skills like weaving the sticks, creating something with layers like leaves to have insulation. And then there's a bunch of different kinds of shelters that you can do with that.
Yeah.
Digging into the ground.
Yeah, I think that, like, going back, not to keep harping on that show, but the show alone, you know, they typically, you know, one of the items that they bring is typically not a tent, because I don't think that they're allowed to do that, but you see varying different types of shelters that they're building. So give you a number of different items. So
Yeah, ideas too.
yeah, so having a basic idea how to build a blind or a basic shelter, and using shrubs or branches.
Lean-to, A-frame, teepees.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you can just look at and just have an idea. So if you are in that situation, maybe you don't have to be an expert, but if you get a chance, you know, putting these things into practical application, you know, take your kids out if you go camping, you know, okay, let's see you can build a shelter, you know, and then see if it you know, provides you with, you know, shelter from the elements, whether it's water or the wind. You know, just practicing those things. So, you know, there's, you know, book smart, and then there's like, you know, actually applying the knowledge. So
Yes.
that's one thing you have to be careful of, is you can have a lot of gear, you can have a lot of knowledge, but you have to be able to apply it in a practical setting. So it's good to practice with your gear.
Yeah, 100%. What's next?
Next is food. So, I mean, that's, you know, obviously a basic element. You know, right now in a normal state, typically, for most of us, we have a grocery store or a convenience store or restaurant it's, you know, within a reasonable driving distance. You know, you have all this stuff like DoorDash and Instacart and all that stuff, which
Oh
I
my
think
God.
it's kind of made us a little bit lazy.
That's a glamping plus staycation.
So obviously, in a survival scenario, you know, these things are not going to become available. And, you know, if you've lived in Buffalo during a snowstorm, or, you know, you go to the grocery store and, you know, milk and eggs and, you know, Twinkies are all gone from the store. You know, these people, they wait till the absolute last second, and then you go to the grocery store and like all the stuff's being cleaned out. But it's like, if you have some on hand, like I recommend having at least a week's worth of food for everyone in your family. So just whether it's canned goods are really good, because obviously they're shelf stable. They usually have a year or longer in terms of shelf life. Rice is a good one. Peanut butter has, you know, high in protein. It's shelf stable. Canned meat or tuna or some kind of other type of canned fish. Excuse me. Canned fruit, beans, pasta, things that are shelf stable, because again, if for some reason you lose electricity, you might not have access to your refrigerator or your oven. So having things that are easy to make and are high in nutrients are good.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, peanut butter and jelly in particular, they have a really long life. You know, some of these things you have to kind of look into it and do your own research. There's going to be a best by date for different kinds of foods. And for some foods, it's like, okay, you really got to kind of pay attention to that. And for others, it's like best by means best by, but it doesn't mean expired.
Right.
And knowing the difference is helpful.
Yeah.
These are things that, you know, you could really kind of look into, and then you have to determine, you know, nutritional value, shelf life, and just like stability in terms of storage itself.
Yeah.
And like sustainability in terms of like the medium. Some people get into like the jarring, the canning, they'll do it themselves. You know, of course, like freezing techniques, depending on the kind of food it is.
No.
Some of the perishables are things that you want to, you know, you just gotta, it's a numbers game. You got to figure out, how long can I make this thing last before I lose the nutrition?
Right. Yeah.
And that'll give me the biggest bang for my buck in terms of like superfoods. Like you should look up like the superfoods, and then, like avoid things like the dirty dozen, and, focus on the things that are like high in protein, high in nutritional value. Quinoa is a superfood, like spirulina is really good. And there's all kinds of new stuff coming out too. I don't know if this is already on your list, and I don't mean to jump the shark, but like biohacking has become a big thing, which is like, nootropic stabilizers and things that like flush your mitochondria and stuff like that.
Yeah, I haven't really got too much into that aspect. I know it's a newer field.
Yeah. It's on the up and up, and it's fascinating how much more socially acceptable it's become, kind of like rain barrels.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
Yeah, but I mean, definitely food. And the thing is, too, is with food is, one thing as just a preparedness hack, I guess would say, is if you're buying extra food, buy food that you eat, because sometimes people fall into this where they, buy stuff that might be shelf stable for, say, 10 years, but it might be something they don't normally eat. So obviously, you're not going to be able to eat like shrimp and caviar and lobster probably in a survival situation, unless you're, on like a fishing boat or something. But, you want to have something that has the nutrients. So it's something good to do the research. And then, like a lot of canned food, I mean, most canned food is usually good for a couple of years. So unless the can is bulging or you open it up and it has like a foul odor, most of the time that food is good really, for 5 to 10 years, depending on what it is.
Right. And if you're really an enthusiast and you nod to our brothers and sisters in the armed forces, you can get into MREs.
Yes.
Meals ready to eat.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some MREs that are better than others. If you had those before. But some of that stuff can get expensive. I mean, there's Mountain House and there's Wise and a couple other of these companies that have like kind of that camping or preparedness food market. But just some of that stuff can be a little bit expensive. So
really high in sodium.
Yeah. So, I mean, it could be it could be good to have some of that on hand, but I wouldn't recommend getting really heavy into that because typically it's much more expensive than having some beans and rice and things you could have throw together. Maybe some bouillon cubes for making some stews and things like that. So just things you have on hand that can make easy meals. And then just being able to on the topic of food, just having some things on hand like can openers. Just having a really good can opener, a couple can openers, because if you are in a survival situation and say you have an electric can opener or whatever it is, you want to have redundancy there so you can actually get it open, so you're not injuring yourself and having to dive into first aid because you're using a knife to open an aluminum can.
And even with the handmade ones, a lot of times the ones you get at the dollar-y type stores they break in a year or two.
Yeah.
You can go and get ones. Again, if you want to look at stuff that defies pre-planned obsolescence, that defies like breaking down prematurely. I remember, I think our U.S. president made a quip like, it's amazing that this is an aside, but I'll bring it right back to the topic. It's amazing that, windshield wipers break every year or two. Mm-hmm. You go to the auto shop and then you get it, you put it on, the plastic falls off, and then you got to go get another one. He's like, Secret Service vehicles or whatever, those things last 100 years. There's no reason that you can't make a bunch of this different stuff in a way that it lasts, but they choose not to. So if you want to find something when you really need it, like surviving, that's reliable, look at what our armed forces brothers and sisters use. What do they use in wartime? And you'll learn so much about just something basic. There's a can opener that they use, and that is a standard issue in the military. You got to sit there and push it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. It's like a P80 or something like that.
Yeah. And it just won't break on you. It's a skill. You got to learn how to get the leverage right.
Yep.
But once you know how to do it, you basically are like, okay, we're good to go here. My dollar can opener is not going to, even if it's not electric, is not going to, fail me because I got this.
Yeah. So something just as basic as that, just having some more, primitive things, just having some maybe cast iron ware. So whether you have like a Dutch oven or cast iron pot, something that you could use not only in the oven, but if you had to, it could be used in an open flame. So, I mean, something like a Dutch oven, you could use it for, baking, whether you're making like pancakes or you're cooking in it, but there's multiple practical applications for that. And typically it's not expensive. If you take care of it and you follow the instructions, it'll, last forever.
You have to season it
Yeah.
with oil, use chainmail to scrub it.
Yeah, but even something like, we have a couple of them. The kids initially thought it was like kind of hokey, but you have like the egg beater that's a manual crank, but it's like, if you're, depending on, even just, baking, you might not want to get out all the equipment for the mixer. So you got the standard, cranking egg
Old
beater.
Faithful.
Yeah. So just basic things like that, or excuse me. Just like an apple peeler, things like that. Just things that you can use that, excuse me, don't require technology. So just, not only just in terms of like physical food, but just having like, spatulas and things like that you could use if you needed to cook, or a wooden spoon or things like that you could use, whether you're cooking outside or, cooking in an alternative scenario. So things like that you don't maybe think of
Absolutely
in terms of food. And then another topic here that we've touched on briefly, I guess, is defense or protection. So, sometimes can be a hot topic, but I think it's something that in the breakdown of society, that's something you have to be mindful of as fathers and protectors of our family. We have to, we're called by God to actually, not only protect our own livelihood in terms of our lives, but protect our wives and our kids. Obviously it's, you're not going out there and being a vigilante if something happens, but God forbid somebody breaks into your house or is trying to, accost your wife or your kids. You need to step up and be prepared to defend yourself and your family. Obviously you don't, if you're able to say subdue an attacker, obviously, you want to get them to the authorities or, obviously not go beyond that. But I mean, if you're in a scenario where it's, life or death, the catechism actually calls us to actually defend ourselves, even if it comes up to taking someone else's life. Obviously, that would be more of a defensive nature. We're not going out there and just like, say there's, a mob gathering outside your house, you going out there and just indiscriminately just shooting at them obviously would not be constructive or, what God calls us to do. But if they're trying to burn your house down or break into your house, then that would be where that action would be, justified in, terms of, our beliefs. And on that topic, I guess, in terms of defense or protection, just having a solid, whether it's a pocket knife or a fixed blade knife, for protection. Hopefully you don't have to use it for protection, but that could be, protection against animals. It could be protection against people, and also obviously other practical applications like, cutting cordage, cutting wood. So many different practical applications there for a good knife, or typically if you're out in the woods, a more of a fixed blade knife might be more practical because it, typically it's a little bit stronger. If you're in deep, vegetation, you could use it as kind of like a machete, or many different applications there.
Yeah. Two caveats I just want to throw in on that quickly. Check out your local regulation and ordinances in terms of sometimes the length of the blade has to be under a certain length, depending on what kind of knife, and then the action, like a switchblade, I believe is not considered legal in our state. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. We mentioned about water in certain states, certain countries, you're not even allowed to have a knife. Yeah. It's like amazing, where it's like, But not to get back into a philosophical realm, but the pragmatics of what you're saying right now, just make sure that you're, checking all those boxes, because that's part of being responsible. And by the way, when it's those of us who are being responsible, that's what makes it so that the laws actually work the way they're supposed to.
Right.
Right. That's what you kind of need to do. It's kind of like when you do hunting, in the hunting class, they're always like, don't just like splay your animal out in a way that would be considered offensive to people that don't think the way you think. It's like, why would you go out of your way? You know what I mean? To misrepresent responsibility.
Right.
And the same thing applies with this. And then in terms of pragmatics of which to pick, you mentioned different kinds for different applications. Full tang, right?
Yep.
A full tang knife would be the knife where the metal actually goes all the way into the handle itself as well, which is considered the most sturdy application. Right. That's like, you think of like a K-bar, which is like a standard issue for the U.S. Marine Corps.
Yep.
Could help in some of those woods applications you're talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, definitely. But that's something that I guess in terms of if you, a basic survival thing, if you're out and about and you needed something, having a solid knife is something that's worth, making sure that it's something that's going to hold up. You don't want it to be, breaking, and then the type of steel or what it's made out of, you don't want it to get like super dull real easily. So that could be something that's really critical in terms of survival, or even just, in camping setting or, any kind of long-term survival scenario.
And you don't have to know how to use a stone to keep sharpening it.
Sharpen it. Yep.
Yeah. Get rid of rust if, God forbid, it ends up having that issue.
Yeah, and then I guess another topic, obviously, that falls in this realm would be different types of firearms. So depending on your state and local regulations, obviously, if you have the ability to have access to a pistol, that's great. Different states have different rules in terms of carrying, where you can carry it. But if any kind of firearm, you want to make sure you follow all the safety regulations, making sure you're keeping it away from kids, you're keeping it locked up, keeping the ammo separate. So following all those rules just for safety and just general times. Typically, if you take a hunter safety course, they go through all that stuff in addition to the hunting aspect, but they go through a lot of real practical firearm safety aspects. And then just picking out guns that are practical. So obviously, so you see some of these movies, if you're getting a pistol, everyone's like, oh, I'm going to get a 45. It's like, well, for most people,
that's hand cannon.
A 45, I mean, depending on your situation, I guess your build and what your application is, that might be a lot of gun for some people. So I think most people...
That's for taking out a hog, right?
Yeah. Or, yeah.
Hey, sometimes you got to do that with a hand cannon.
Yeah. But I think that, most in terms of firearms, in terms of pistols, I think most people would probably lean towards 9mm as more of a standard. Another thing to consider in terms of firearms is that, God forbid you had to use it and you're in a worst case scenario, you're probably not going to have the ability to maybe purchase new ammo, or, most people don't have the capacity to make ammo. So it's good to have something that is in common use. So, whether it's a 9mm or 12 gauge or 20 gauge or 22 long rifle, having things that are readily available. That way, if you needed to barter or trade with someone, you could do so. But if you have some kind of, really odd caliber, it might be more difficult to procure that if you run out of ammo.
Right.
Also, and a lot of times, if it's more of a common ammo, it's usually, could potentially be less expensive, easier to gather in a normal state. If it's some kind of specialty ammo, or that it might be more expensive to buy currently, and it might be more difficult to find. So that's, just something, application to think about. And then if you're not able to, based on your laws, or there's, the permitting process for pistols, one thing that you can have pretty much in the United States, I'm pretty sure in almost every state, is a shotgun. A pump shotgun is something that you can have, as long as you're not like a felon or other restrictions, but almost in every state that I'm aware of, you can have a shotgun. Some states you have to, have a 10-day waiting period, but at least in New York, which is very restrictive in terms of our Second Amendment rights, you can go to the store, do a background check, and purchase a shotgun. So in that area, I would recommend either a 12 gauge or a 20 gauge shotgun. I would probably, in most applications, I would recommend the 12 gauge just because it's more common. But I mean, if you're having your spouse using the gun or older teenage or young adult children, the 20 gauge is also a little bit more practical. It has a little less recoil, but still has, very capable in terms of stopping power. And then in terms of the shotguns or any firearm, I would recommend at least having at least 100 rounds of ammo on hand. So, I mean, the news or something like that might make a big deal out of it. But I mean, if you go to the range and you're there for like an hour, you're probably going to go through 50 rounds of ammo.
Well, yeah, and you need to practice.
Yeah.
This is like one of those things I said earlier. I didn't finish this thought, but there's different skills you're going to have, and it's good to collaborate with other people that have other good skills. Even if you're good at something, like people doing the annual CPR training, you got to keep up on that year over year, or else you may or may not, it's like muscle memory. You use it or you lose it,
right?
Depending on if you've really got it down. And that's true for just about everything that we're touching on here. You could have every category here figured out, but then all of a sudden when you're in the real world situation, like you said, if you have all the knowledge, but you don't actually have the tactile kinesthetic experience, then you might just, God forbid, it's depending on the level of the threat, you could be in a trauma state where you're just not thinking right.
Yeah.
And you're just, it's not second nature to you because you don't have that experience. And it's the same thing with using the firearm. You need to have the experience. You need to have the practice. And in order to be able to do that, you got to have a reserve with ammunition.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 100 rounds of ammo, I think is kind of a basic thing. I mean, if you can have more, obviously it's not something you're going to hoard, but I mean, if you're somebody that's actively practicing shooting, if you can get it on sale or whatever, having a couple hundred rounds of ammo is really not that much in terms of if you're using a firearm, you're training with it, having it if you need it. And then also just, with most firearms, like with a pistol, there's different types of ammo. So there's ammo you would use for target shooting. And then there's ammo that's defensive. So typically the ones you're using for target shooting for a pistol, it's usually called full metal jacket. So it's just a full, solid bullet. So, if you're shooting a target, it's good for, accuracy and getting your sights and everything lined up. But then if you wanted to go into defensive, there's something called hollow points where the bullet actually expands to actually, take out your target if you have to do that. Also, the practical nature of the hollow point is that if you were to shoot something or someone, the bullet is actually stopping there and it's not continuing forward. Whereas if you were to, shoot somebody with something that's a solid bullet, like a
slug,
full metal jacket, that bullet could continue through your exterior wall. It could continue through that person, hit an innocent bystander. So, these are things you have to research and get knowledge on it. And it comes down to actual, firearm safety.
Yeah. And, if anybody is going to incorporate this as a part of their overall system, you got to go through the correct process. You got to take the class. You know what I mean? You got to know your firearm safety. You got to know the basics, like keeping your finger off, the trigger guard and all that other stuff. So, don't ever point a firearm at somebody. Yep. Don't ever point a firearm at anything unless you're intending to shoot it, whether or not it's even loaded. Yep. But these are, without getting into every aspect of that, what you're touching on right now is, again, of course it's going to be touchy for some people, but it may or may not even ever have anything to do with defense in terms of other people. It could just be straight up hunting.
Yeah.
And hunting is, look, unless you're like, let's say a vegan or somebody that's like an apologist, like it's one thing. I've got friends on every side of the spectrum that you could think of in this, and I'm sure you do too. And nowadays, it's a lot more common than when we were kids. You know, back in the day when there weren't a lot of different allergies, it seemed like back then. You know, but now it's you know. You'll get people that are like, this is what works for me, but you do you. You'll get other people that say, I think that my way is the only way. And this is how everybody should do things. And people have strong beliefs in different areas. But the majority of people eat meat.
Yeah.
We're omnivores, obviously, in terms of as the people that we are. You always find somebody that might debate even that. But generally, that's agreed. And so for those who are open to the hunting mentality, you know, it's kind of one of those, you know, I remember in grade school, I always loved learning about the Native Americans because they were so respectful of animals. They would use every piece of the animal. If they had to, they had like a connection to nature and taking good care of nature and working with nature and not against it. So if you've got that kind of a mentality, if you're able to go get the meat from the store, but you don't even, like, you can't even begin to process the idea of processing your own meat. You know, once upon a time, our ancestors would probably have thought that there was something wrong with you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the Native Americans and Native people, you know, they were the ultimate survivalists because they had to get everything. They
were homesteaders.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
But, you know, they had to get everything from the land, and they, you know, had to create their own tools and things like that until, you know, the more modern age. But, they, you know, they couldn't go to the general store typically early on. They had to, you know, make their own tools, you know, bows and arrows and, you know, things like that to, you know, procure the meat and, you know, farming equipment and things like that to, you know, be able to hunt and gather.
Right. And even, it's not even just, you know, being able to shoot or fire, whether it's a gun and bow and arrow, whatever it is, a blow dart. I mean, it's not even just that. It's also about procuring the meat in a way, processing it,
Yep.
and storing it.
Yeah.
You know, but anyways, that's another rabbit hole. That's probably beyond the scope of this. But do you have any other categories that we haven't touched yet?
The other ones I just have is just talking about the aspect of hunting and gathering. Just, you know, some basic devices you could have that are fairly easy, you know, having a telescopic fishing pole or some kind of a compact fishing pole available, something like a plant ID book, or if you know, things are working, having an app that identifies, you know, things that are in nature. So whether it's you know, a plant you could use for medicine, or, you know, berries you could eat, or you know, things like that, just something that can help you in the wilderness. Also, something I found that's really cool, it's called a yo-yo fishing device. So it looks like a wheel, and it's actually something you can actually hang from a tree, and you put a lure on there, and it's something where one thing, if you are in a survival scenario, obviously you're trying to maximize your time, because you're going to have so much time that, you know, during the day. You're also could potentially be trying to maximize or minimize the use of calories. So you might be trying to build a shelter, but at the same time, you're like, I got to eat. So this yo-yo fishing is cool because you can set up this rig, and it actually, you can put the fish hooking on there in the bait. And then if a fish hits the line, what actually happens is it actually goes up like a yo-yo. So it actually will like automatically reel up the fish. So essentially you could hang it on a tree or something like that, and you could come back and you could have a fish there, but you're not actually fishing. So it's you know,
it like utilizes gravity and just the pull.
Yeah, the tension. So if something hits it, then it will initiate to reel back up. So it has like some kind of like pin or something like that, where if you pull away from it, you know, release the tension and then let go of the tension, then it comes back like a yo-yo.
So what you're touching on right now is an example of passive hunting, gathering.
Yeah.
Laying traps, laying snares.
Yeah.
You know, because you got to passively set those things up because you got other things you got to do.
Yeah.
And then you come back and hopefully something's available.
Yeah. So that was just something that I came across that I thought was really ingenious, and you can get them on Amazon or, you know, fairly inexpensively, but something like that could be really helpful because you could put one or two of those out, and maybe you don't catch your fish, but you're this device is essentially fishing for you while you're off doing something else.
Nice.
So that's pretty helpful. Just having a fishing kit, so even just being able to have some lures, or they call them jigs. It looks almost like a trident, but like you can use that for like spearing a fish or frog, something you can actually just attach onto a stick. So that's another way to have something that's real easy to carry with you. And then just having just some basic familiarity with just setting up a snare, to catch, whether it's a squirrel or a rabbit or something like that for meat, it would be super helpful and practical. And then on that same topic, just having seeds or sprouts on hand, and having just a basic ability to know what you would need to do to grow some plants, or if the things are not happening, what you could grow inside, or what sprouts you can grow in like a mason jar, and they usually can eat them in a couple days. But things like that, just having a basic knowledge of that, in terms of ways you can procure food, kind of outside the box. And then I guess the last topic I have here on my sheet is just first aid. So just having that knowledge you mentioned, just having basic first aid knowledge, CPR, things like that, how to put on a splint, or treat a burn. Things like that could be really practical in general everyday life. You can many times, like the fire stations, well, you could be volunteer and get training that way, or the Red Cross puts on classes for first aid, and even some survival things, preparedness. They're a really big preparedness organization, so you can find classes, or there's a lot of videos out there. You mentioned a tourniquet, so a lot of the tourniquets now are pretty easy to use. So they have like where you pull it tight, and then they have like a windlass, so it's actually like kind of cranking it to get to the so it's cutting off essentially the blood flow. So just having a basic knowledge of that, hopefully you never need to use that. Having additional prescriptions, if you have any prescriptions your family's on, things like Tylenol and Motrin. It's kind of gross, but like if you're in a survival situation, depending on what you're eating, like maybe antidiarrheals, things like for upset stomach, just some basic, have some basic over-the-counter medications, as well as any medications that you might need to take on a daily basis. Have some extra on hand in case you can't get to the pharmacy. Burn treatments. If you can get some antibiotic ointments, those things are helpful.
Aloe-based stuff.
Yeah. A lot of the other thing too is on that topic, obviously it's a whole nother rabbit hole, but looking into homeopathic remedies. So there's a lot of different homeopathic remedies you can use for different ailments, and bug bites or burns and things like that, upset stomach, that you can use that help with a lot of ailments, and they don't have like the side effects of some of the maybe pharmaceuticals out there.
You're reminding me, I remember I had a buddy who was big into the herbs. You mentioned herbs, being able to identify things that are helpful in the field. This person was awesome. They were like, yeah, sometimes I just take a walk through our local cemetery because there's all this plantain all around. And it's like plantain, it's like everywhere in our local area. And just knowing that has some really great healing properties, and you can make it into a tea.
Yeah.
And to just be able to look at it and say, hey, some people would think that's a weed. That's not a weed.
Yeah. Or cattails, a lot of aspects of the cattail are, if you have any kind of water around you, most pieces of that plant are edible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just, there's, as we've talked about, there's numerous of topics on this, particular, area of preparedness, but, it's good to just have, and, don't let it overwhelm you. It's something, if you're just starting out, just pick a topic and just, brush up on it, and then, make it fun. So, I mean, for me, I find it enjoyable to look at things about preparedness, and, learn about, different things that are going on, and how I can be prepared. So, don't let it overwhelm you. Kind of chunk it. Don't try to, learn all the different aspects of preparedness and survival in one day, but just, try to pick up things as you go. And, there's a lot of videos and books out there, TV shows. So make it fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us, Jeff. And as we get wrapping up here, I do just have a couple of closing questions, pragmatic. First, I want to reiterate what you had just said. Obviously, it's like everything. The virtue lies in the mean between excess and deficit. Just like you don't want to become like a gambler or misuse your family's monetary resources. You got to budget. And also, it's like, how do you eat an elephant, right?
Mm-hmm.
One bite at a time.
Yep.
And so same thing with a topic like this. If it's something that genuinely interests you or even any aspect of it, then great. That's the thing that you're good at. That's the thing that you bring to the table, to the community. And you enjoy it because it's enjoyable, not because you're stressed out about stuff. And you really, if you can at least have some sort of a baseline of basics that you're like, I want to make sure I check the boxes on the most basic stuff for the sake of being a provider and a protector, you work your way up one day at a time. Yep. All of a sudden a year goes by and you're like, wow, I got like a basic plan in place.
Yep.
Boom. So you have to have like a kind of like a medium term plan and a long-term plan, not just an immediate plan.
Yeah.
And then it just comes together.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this stuff too is like, it doesn't always have to be, worst case scenario, having some extra food on hand. It doesn't have to be, for your doomsday bunker. It could be, okay, I don't have to go to the store now because I have an extra bottle of ketchup, or I'm making a soup now and I don't have to go out and get, beans. I already have, an extra can on hand. So that, stuff like that where, if you're replacing stuff, one thing I had on my sheet here is a preparedness hack is, it's really good to have some kind of list or spreadsheet of what you have in terms of preparedness and survival things. That way you're not like buying the same thing again if you already have it. Or if you're buying some extra food, just maybe have like a list of what you have, and that way you have it. Or, say if you're making a stew and you use 3 cans of beans, okay, I just need to know that I need to maybe next time I go to the store, I can replenish those 3 cans of beans. So
right.
Just being, mindful of that.
And cycling.
Yeah.
If you have that, you could have, buy dates or whatever, and then make sure that you're using the cans that are older.
Yep.
Stash the newer cans, in some sort of a system so that you have that cycling in motion.
Yeah. I like to write on the top of if it's a can, I like to just use a Sharpie and just write real clear the best by date. So it's, easy to see.
There you go. So with all of this in mind, just 2 pragmatic closers here. First of all, we mentioned earlier, it's not just for men, it's for women too. And obviously to some extent, everybody's different. Anybody can do any of the things that we had mentioned, but is there any specific advice that you would recommend or that you would say, oh yeah, women like to get into it in this way, or just any words of encouragement?
Yeah, I would say just include, just don't be like, oh, this is something I just have to focus on as a leader and provider of the family. Get your wife and your kids involved, like we mentioned before. But also, you might have certain areas of preparedness or survival that you really enjoy, but try to maybe find ones that that your wife might, like I'm not a great cook, but my wife, she enjoys cooking. So incorporate that. Be like, what would be helpful to have on hand if you had to make something that's easy to make that has, good nutrition for the family. So that could be an area where you're including your wife in terms of, potential food you're storing, or utensils you need, or in terms of cleaning, like what should we have on hand in addition to like soap or, detergent, things like that, getting her involved. Or, my wife, she's really into like a lot of the holistic medicine. So what would be good on hand to have in terms of homeopathic remedies or tinctures or essential oils? So find an area that either your kids or your spouse or, interested in, and then incorporate that into your preparedness. So it's not just you doing it, but if you're all working together and finding the aspect, and then, they could be the expert in that area, and then, you know, they could cross train you, or if you're better in firearms or fire building, you could, you know, help them with that. So I think just being mindful and not just being like, you know, off in your office or in the basement, just working on this stuff, like incorporate in that into your family. And I think that not only will it be helpful in the long term, but it'll also be helpful to your marriage and your relationship with your family, because you're incorporating that in, and you can make it fun.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that wisdom. And then just to tie it all together, I guess, going back to the actual current events right now, do you have any sort of like an analysis based on what we've seen, based on the volatility of things, in terms of like what to prioritize, or just maybe just some, again, like well-rounded advice to encourage those that are still on the fence about why it might be a good idea? Some people might not be thinking about or reading between the lines with the headlines that we're seeing or not seeing.
Yeah, I just think that you know, just looking back, and not to be like this conspiracy theorist, but it just definitely seems like there are elements at play within the U.S. and globally that are really just trying to um, really focus on civil unrest and lawlessness. So you had like the Black Lives Matter thing. You had the stuff with like COVID. Right now you have stuff with the Free Palestine, and you had the No Kings movement recently. So just being mindful of that, you know, just keep an eye on social media. You don't have to be crazy about it, but just be aware if there's, you know, a protest down the street from your house, you know, be mindful of that. You know, you want to, you know, drive through that. If there's some kind of protest, you know, you got your family in there, things could go sideways. So just basic things like that. You know, just being aware of, you know, if you have like I just have a scanner app. So like if something's going on, like you hear sirens or something like that, maybe just tune in and just, you know, check out and see what's going on. You don't have to be this person that's chasing ambulances or, spying on the fire department, but it's good to just be aware of your surroundings. You know, you don't want to walk into a bad situation if you know there's a, protest or demonstration, and just be aware. And, if you're, I think right now in our current situation, when you're at, places of worship, I think it's important to be extra cautious, be mindful of people around you. If you're out and about on the street, they call it situational awareness, but you shouldn't really, if you're walking around and it's late at night, you being, 10 texts deep in your phone is not going to help you if somebody's trying to mug you or something bad's happening. So just be aware of your surroundings, just be aware of the people that are around you. You don't have to be suspicious, but, typically if somebody is trying to do you harm or harm other people, usually they'll have some tells you can kind of identify. They might be nervous or acting weird, or so just be mindful of that when you're out there, protecting yourself, your family. But I think right now, for me, just be extra mindful at religious sites, because I think that might be a potential target. So I mean, obviously still go to the mass and that, but just be aware of where the exits are, and how you would respond if somebody was trying to harm you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And there's a theme there, right? Know where your exits are. The point is like part of situational awareness is not just what's going on in the moment, but what's coming next. Having like a logical flow. Maybe you back in somewhere instead of pulling in the other way because you can leave easier. Think about what's coming next. Like even if you get stuck in traffic, if you're like riding someone's bumper, what if all of a sudden you got to back up, or like you don't give yourself enough space? Or you mentioned all of a sudden you're driving through protesters. God forbid that they turn violent. That seems to be happening. It's on the rise lately. Also, just thinking smartly, like what is the herd doing, right? The herd is the people that didn't think about preparedness, and now all of a sudden they're just demolishing the aisles in the grocery hardware supply store.
Yeah.
Because they didn't think ahead. The herd is everybody hopping on the highway because all of a sudden you got to get out of somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. If everyone's on the highway, what's your alternative? I mean, some of this is just, you got to think smart. Yeah. You got to think ahead. You gotta be a critical thinker.
Yeah. Just brainstorming different scenarios is just, you know, just playing it out as the different scenarios. If, you know, you had to evacuate the city, you know, like you're saying, like the highway, you know, you're not going to want to go out there. So what are some surface routes you can go, or where could you go? Just your, you know, do you have a family member that has a cabin that you could go, or another family member that has, you know, maybe more prepared than you that's in the country, or, you know, someplace you could go that might be, you know, safe. So just some scenarios to think about, you know, but it's good to be thinking ahead. You know, I think also too, just to touch on briefly is, I think we're kind of in a weird financial climate right now. So I think that, you know, I think that in terms of this preparedness aspect, it might be good to have some actual commodities. So things you can invest in, like we talked about, like having a good knife or a firearm. These are things that not only have a practical application, but they actually have, like, you know, practical, I mean, you could take them and sell them. So they actually have like actual, you know, value. Also, you know, just things like gold is a little bit out of most people's, you know, financial perspective, being over $3,000 right now. But things like silver, or, you know, even food. I mean, food has gone up like, you know, crazy amounts. So just, you know, if there's a sale on something you like, you know, buying a little extra, that could be actually, you know, savings as opposed to having it in your checking account. So things like that, just thinking a little bit outside the box. And, you know, your 401k is great, you know, CD, savings account, those things are great. But, you know, if there was a crisis, you're not going to be able to go to your ATM and withdraw money. And, you know, the Wall Street Journal and, you know, stock market's going to be a thing of the past if things get, you know, hairy. So
Sure. Well, and I appreciate your perspective, man. Look, I'll tell you something right now. It's not crazy to talk like this when until today, as of this recording, this will be out probably the week of by God's grace, but we were in wartime. People were on the verge of talking about, you know, world war. They were talking about closing the Strait of Hormuz, which supplies 20% of energy, oil, gas, to the globe. And right now it's still active. You know, you've got like FBI, other people in our country saying the threat level is very high alert right now.
mm-hmm.
You know, be on the lookout for a terror attack. So when you say, hey, be cautious at worship sites, this isn't, you know, it's not a political statement. It's not fear mongering. It's pragmatic and prudent because it's applicable to what we're being told by the leadership right now.
Yeah.
And, you know, the reason that you think about religious sites is because the recent war that took place was theocratic. It's a theocratic war. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just being cognizant of what the reality is and the real world consequences that it might have for our quality of life that up until now we've taken for granted.
Yeah.
When you've got drones coming out of, you know, trucks, that's a low cost tactic.
Yep.
And, you know, you mentioned the finances are different. That's with the advent of AI. That's with the advent of all of this automation regarding real estate and farmland and everything going to the corporations.
Yep.
It's tough.
Cashless system, you know,
these are things that are happening.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? You get out of it what you put into it. You're going to reap what you sow. God helps those who help themselves. And the first and foremost thing to keep in mind with that is spirituality.
Yep.
You know, we talked a lot about physical stuff, but I appreciate, Jeff, that you also brought that mental health and that spiritual health perspective interlaced throughout, because really those are, you know, the spiritual is kind of like the root from which everything flows if you're rightly ordered.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, you know, if you survive a disaster and you lose your immortal soul, I mean, what's the point?
Man.
So, I mean, you got to keep it in perspective in that sense. And I think that, you know, having our faith and having the faith formation that a lot of us are blessed to have, that in itself is a huge thing for preparedness, because that can prepare us for, a death of a family member, financial situation, financial crisis, things going on in the globe. I mean, that, if you look at the Bible, I mean, it's full of wars and famines and all kinds of craziness. And I mean, the people kept their faith, and they, kept on persevering, and, they had hard times, but I think they wouldn't have made it without their faith ultimately. God helped them along the way, but I mean, they went through some serious stuff. I mean,
Yes. Dude, you couldn't make this up. Like 12 days ago, whatever, when this 12-day war began, I hosted a group coaching session, was putting on a group coaching session as I'm regularly doing. And it was on the topic of death, but from a perspective of, here is how to be spiritually prepared for this. Here's how to help your family members. Did you know there's a kit? There's a kit that was traditionally always a part of Catholicism until a couple of decades ago. Like, to prepare for last rites and everything else, and knowing about the apostolic blessing and all these things, and getting access to a priest and having those connections. And right at the end of the event, Operation Rising Lion just started. Like, they were like, okay, we're going to war tonight. And everyone was like, well, we just prepared for death, so that's good.
yeah.
It's like, it's wild stuff, but it's definitely should be a part of anyone's checklist in terms of preparedness. Huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, hey, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Thanks for coming on. Do you have any just final parting words to share? Or?
Yeah, I mean, just keep the faith. Prepare in all aspects of your life. And I think if you are preparedness minded, and the physical, spiritual, and then just, worst case disaster mindset, I think that you'll be a more holistic person, and you'll have less stress, and I think that you'll prosper.
Awesome. Thanks so much again for coming on, my man.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And if you enjoy content like this, we exhort you to like, subscribe, share. And speaking of holistic, if you would like to sign on for some of that holistic coaching, check out therichdawn.com. This is the Rich Dawn podcast. That's the Rich, DAWN.com, to get in on more of this strategizing and all of the goodness. God bless you.